just in case there's anybody here who doesn't know, I'm Erin Matthews. I'm the Skagit Fishery Enhancement Group's Habitat Restoration Coordinator, and I oversee the spawner survey program with lots of help from Lucy and also from our AmeriCorps service members, especially Danielle. She is our outreach associate, and you will be sending your data sheets to her, and she's also going to be sending out updates throughout the season. And if you all send us excellent pictures, then there's a chance we can stick those in the update emails, and everybody can see your excellent stinky carcasses, or your cool videos of lively male competition over a red. And so send us pictures. If they're really, really good, you might just be included on things like postcards that we send out to landowners showing what a spawner survey looks like if they're wearing their safety gear.
Yes, outreach loves to see it.
Yeah, we love photos for social media. If you take a photo and you are comfortable with some sorts of sharing and not others, then give us a heads up so that we know. But it would be really impressive if somebody sent us too many photos. I've never seen it before. So when in doubt, send us your fishy survey photos. And other than that, I think we can get started. This is recorded. We're going to put this whole training up on YouTube, on our YouTube page, and send it out to everybody who couldn't be here today. And so I don't know, don't say anything embarrassing. If anybody has any questions, then you can type it in the chat box. You can wait till the ends of a section, or if it's a burning question, then you can stop me. And then with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Lucy. She's gonna get us started. I think.
Sorry, I was on mute. Erin, you may need to do the share screen over on your end and advance for me.
Oh, okay. So would you like to say next and then I
Sure.
advance for you? Okay, I'm happy to do that.
And also, I'm not seeing Katie on here, so I don't know if Olivia, if you're in the same room with her, maybe you can remind her. And Erin's talking, but nobody can hear her.
Katie's trying to figure it out right now.
Right when you said Katie, you didn't see Katie, I got a message that she was in the waiting room and I let her in. So
okay, great.
I think she's here now.
There she is. She's here. Welcome, Katie. Okay. Well, thanks. And Erin, I'll just let you queue up the presentation, and we can start at the beginning. Most of you guys are veterans of spawner surveys, and so you're just gonna have to sit here and suffer through some of the stuff that the new folks will be introduced to right now. But because I know we have at least one person who is totally new to spawner surveys, and in addition to our 3 AmeriCorps members. So Skagit Fisheries Enhancement Group is a private nonprofit organization. And Erin, do you want to put up the presentation or share your screen? We see you. Can't hear you, but we see you.
It says you are screen sharing on my screen, and I have the presentation up.
Okay.
So I'm not sure why.
Do you see it?
Hal, do you see a PowerPoint or just me?
Yes, I do. It's a map.
Okay.
You see a map?
But it looks like Washington.
Oh,
okay.
Shoot. It's like going through, it's like
I
progressing
see it
itself.
I see it now. Okay.
Okay.
Sorry. Thanks for bearing with us, people. Okay. So just a little intro to give you guys an idea of what we're going to be talking about. I'm just doing the first 9 slides, and then Erin is going to take over. So I just want to do a brief intro of the program, Skagit Fisheries and the program, and then volunteering for this program. And then she's going to do sort of the nuts and bolts of what spawner surveys are, how you do them, and lots of details about salmon. So, so go ahead to the next, Erin. So this is a map showing just, I know there's a few of you who probably haven't seen this map. This is the regional fisheries enhancement groups, and Skagit Fisheries is one. We refer to RFEGs, that's what we mean, regional fisheries enhancement groups. And so Skagit Fisheries is region 2. That is most, but not all, of the Skagit watershed that you see outlined in purple on that map. Every place there's a salmon stream in Washington State, there is a regional fisheries enhancement group. And you may notice that there's a big chunk of Eastern Washington where there's no RFEG, and that is because there's no salmon streams in that region. But every other place, there is a group like ours that is doing work very similar to ours, and that means a group of volunteers coordinated to do on the ground restoration projects and also community engagement and education. We sometimes go about those projects in different ways, but for example, NC, the Nooksack group, and Skagit have pretty large staff, and there's some organizations, some RFEGs that have maybe 1 or 2 paid staff, and the rest are volunteers on some level. So we're all doing lots of different work. Next slide, Erin. We do lots of different school programs in addition to, having a paid professional field crew that does in-stream work. That's upper right is a picture of some log jams going into a creek. It's either Day Creek or Finney Creek. I think it's Finney. And then engaging lots of community volunteers. So this picture that you see here are 7th graders from Cedar Woolley doing a service learning project. Once they've learned a lot about watersheds and salmon, we engage volunteers of all ages and ability levels to do things like planting trees and a lot of what you could call citizen science, the monitoring that you guys are signing up to do. We have a couple different monitoring programs, and spawner surveys are just one. So the monitoring that you're signing up to do, the spawner survey volunteering, like we said, there are about 24 creeks in the Skagit and Samish watersheds. The information that you collect is important. It's not just important for SFEG. We want to know, of course, when we do restoration projects, we want to know that what we're doing is having an impact. And so we need the information. We want to know if the fish are showing up. And in addition to our own knowledge and our own sort of effectiveness monitoring, we provide this information to the Department of Fish and Wildlife as well. And our organization and lots of organizations around the state that are doing spawner surveys contribute to the state being able to set, season openings and catch limits and things like that. So the information that you're collecting is actually being used by us and the state, the folks who make the regulations. So if you ever doubt that going out on your rainy day and seeing lots of fish or some fish or no fish is actually having an impact, it's actually being used by us and the regulatory agencies. We were talking this morning about how long we've been doing this program, and I've been here since 1999, and the data that I've seen goes back at least to 1998. So we've been doing the program a long time. It's probably our longest running, it definitely is our longest running monitoring program and our longest running and most popular volunteer program. And we have volunteers come back year after year, as people like Hal can attest. All right, next slide, unless you wanted to add anything to that, Erin.
Oh, can you?
You're muted.
We also use this data in grant applications.
Grant applications, thank you.
Yes, yeah. We grant, people with money always want to know, how do we know there's salmon in there? And in addition to surveying things like if culverts are barriers, if we have information about how there's a good run below a culvert that then we assess and find that it's a fish passage barrier, that paints a really good picture for people with money. And then we get funding to fix barriers, so.
Thanks, Erin. And also Erin reminded me that the sites that we do spawner surveys on, naturally, most of the projects that we do, we then do spawner surveys on, especially if it's like a passage barrier. We clearly want to see, are the salmon making use of the habitat, the new habitat that's opened up? But there are other sites that maybe we haven't done restoration on, but that we're still doing spawner surveys. And the reason is, well, some of them got onto the list because a person who knows us says, hey, I have a salmon stream running through my backyard. Can I do counts there and give you the data? And the one in particular that I'm thinking of, we have two volunteers who live either side of the stream in Mount Vernon. And they would sort of alternate doing spawner surveys, 10 or 12 years ago. And around a few years after we started doing monitoring, there was some construction upstream on the particular creek, and the Department of Ecology contacted us and said, hey, there's some construction going on, and apparently they're not controlling their sediment on the site, and we basically want to know if there are salmon. Is there any documentation of salmon in the stream? Because if so, the fine is going to be bigger for not controlling sediment on a construction site. And we just happen to have several years of spawner survey data that did prove that, yes, there are salmon in that stream. And that's an example of, we don't have any regulatory authority, but if we have data that helps agencies to protect the streams, then we definitely share it with them, and that's helpful as well. So even if we haven't done restoration there, we are still willing to collect data on a survey site. All right, next slide. So the time commitment that we're looking at, generally late October through late December, having seen the timesheets come through for so many years, this is typical for what I see for involvement for volunteers. The sites vary a lot, and some of them around 2 hours to walk, and some of them could be all day. It just depends on what site that you have selected. And it also depends on lots of variables, like, how long it takes to get from your car to the reach that you're walking. And so some of them are real short, and some of them are all day. So we say here each pair of volunteers. It could be a team. Some sites I know they have teams that are larger than 2 people, and that's fine. One option is if you have 3 or 4 people assigned to a site, sometimes that allows you some flexibility. If every person isn't able to go out every single week, then that allows you some flexibility to have some people who will sort of cycle through, and maybe you go every other week if you have enough people in your team. That's unusual, but there are a few teams who do it that way and seem to really works well for them. It's important that the data is collected every 7 to 10 days. You don't want to go out more frequently than 7 days because you may be counting some of the same fish, and you don't want to go less frequently than every 10 days because then you may be missing fish. And so it's important that if you cannot do every 7 to 10 days, that you let us know as soon as possible. And our data is going to be compromised if you don't contact us. And it's not a problem for you to miss a day. Maybe you have a vacation planned, maybe you get sick, lots of different things happen. But if there's any reason, whether in advance or not, just contact us. Contact Danielle. You can contact me, you can contact Aaron, just contact somebody at Skagit Fisheries as soon as you know that you cannot go out for your survey. Like I said, the data is going to be compromised. If we know a month later that there was 1 week that surveys didn't get done, then it really compromises the data on that survey site. You're going to submit data sheets, and data sheets are going to come to us weekly. And so you're going on your sites weekly, and we'd like you to submit the data sheets weekly. This is one way that we'll stay on top of entering the data and just kind of keeping on top of what's going on the different sites. You're going to email those to Danielle. She's going to be collecting all of your data sheets and timesheets. So it's not written here, but and we'll make sure that you have all of this on the sheets. She's outreach. skagitfisheries.org. And then so that's data sheets weekly. Your volunteer timesheets, which we'll go over in a second here, are going to be submitted monthly. And so we will look at those next, I believe. Next slide. So the paperwork that we're going to need from you, we haven't really talked about this yet, but you're going to need the signed volunteer registration. There are a few of you who have not done a volunteer registration. Some of you, like Hal or Eric, who've been volunteering for a while with us, have already done this. If there's any question about whether you've done this registration form, just let me know. We can look and see what we've got on file, but that is something that we need from all new volunteers. And then new this year, of course, you were waiting for it, the COVID-19 waiver. We have been re-engaging volunteers since July. And those of you, there's a couple of you guys out there who have volunteered with us this summer. So I can think of 2 of you at least on this list who have already done this COVID-19 waiver. So you'll know what that looks like. But if you haven't, and that's going to be most of you, we're going to require it of all volunteers before they start the spawner survey. And we will go into a little bit more depth at the end of this workshop about what our COVID-19 safety protocols are, and just requiring all volunteers to follow those. And on your weekly data sheet, there is a checkbox that says, I'm abiding by I know what the COVID-19 safety protocols are, and I'm abiding by those. So again, weekly data sheet, monthly timesheet.
Oh, and just so you guys know, I'm going to send a follow-up email with those documents. So you don't have to worry about like trying to remember all those documents. We'll send an email right after this call.
Yep, what she said. Okay, so many of you know what this looks like or know what this is. You've done in so many of these over the years, but if you haven't, this is the weekly sheet that you're going to be, the monthly sheet that you're going to be turning in. This is the volunteer timesheet. This is the general one. If you have interned with us, or if you are a Washington Service Corps member, you may have not seen this before, but for most volunteers, this is what you'll submit for your spawner survey season timesheet. And I sort of filled in some examples of how you would fill this out. If you were doing education programs with us and spawner surveys, this is an example of the data or timesheet you would use. So you're writing in the hours column. So the column that says day, that's the day of the month. So say I volunteered 5 hours on January 3rd at Conway School. I've filled out number 5 next to, so day 3 of January, so that's January 3rd. I volunteered for 5 hours, and the description and location is basically what did you do and where did you go? And so you can see on the second half of the sheet, it looks like January 17th, I volunteered 5 hours at Walker Creek doing a spawner survey. And then a week later, I did 5 more hours doing a spawner survey at Walker Creek. And so when you fill out your timesheet, whatever the day of the month is, and however many hours you volunteer, and then another equally important part is what are you doing and where. And so write in what your creek site is and that it's a spawner survey. There may be some of you who have things on your monthly timesheet in addition to spawner surveys, but I think most of you are probably only doing spawner surveys, at least this time of year. So it should be pretty simple. And then just write in your total hours down there below the little table. And you have an option of submitting this. You can print it out and sign it and drop it in the mail. You can then scan it and email it to us. You can fax it even. I know some people still use fax machines. You can, we'd prefer you didn't drop it off in person, but you do have lots of options for how to submit it. Okay, next.
Oh, and I just wanted to say the total hours is an example of a little typo, because it looks like this volunteer did 19 hours this month, not 9. So
Aaron, remember when I was saying numbers aren't my forte?
Well, this is good. We see this all the time. So Danielle and I, if we see timesheets that have, or Danielle, if timesheets, and with data sheets as well, like check to see typos, and if it's a super simple typo, then we may just fix it. But otherwise, we may have to send things back to you for clarification, especially on data sheets. So watch for typos.
Yeah, I see typos on timesheets all the time, and I can usually dope them out. But data sheet typos are something that we're probably going to contact you about.
Okay, electronic signature, okay?
Electronic signature is fine.
Okay.
Yep. Thanks, Hal. That's a good question. Yeah, I know a lot of folks, especially in these days, don't want to do a lot of the middle steps. And so that's totally fine. I know a couple of you guys have some tricks and tools up your sleeves, and I appreciate those as well. So the other thing that we're going to require, other than the registration, and this is something that other than 2 of you, I don't think the rest of the volunteers have seen this sheet before. This is something that it basically, we call it the volunteer COVID waiver. And it is basically saying, here is our protocol, and our protocol is basically what the state guidelines from the CDC are. And they list, they're basically saying that you're not among a high risk group, and you accept responsibility for volunteering, knowing, what the facts are, and that you will follow our protocol, which says you'll wear a face mask when you're working with your partner, and or stay 6 feet apart and wear a face mask when this isn't possible. Ideally, you'll wear a face mask all the time because we want you all to stay safe and well and healthy. And then, of course, it's nothing you haven't seen before. Hand sanitizer, hand washing, all that good stuff. Yeah, and Erin I think, is going to go more into this in a few minutes. All right. Are there any questions about that intro? I know there was a lot there. Some of it might be clear as mud, but if there's questions, go ahead and type them in the chat box and we will address them. And yeah, we'll swing back around to safety toward the end of this program and probably get more into depth.
Great.
All right, Erin, it's all you.
Thank you so much, Lucy. So we're going to go over some information about the watershed and Skagit salmon, because we want our spawner surveyors to be oriented to the place that we're collecting data. And then we're also going to go over some identification and biology and some trends in the Skagit and Samish. Okay. So some background about the watersheds. This is a really nice photo. It shows the width of the rivers exaggerated based on stream flow. So with that display method, it's really clear that the Skagit River is a monster river. In our area, it's over 3,000 square miles. It's about 160 miles long from outlet to headwaters. It's 4,500 approximately stream miles if you were to lay them end to end. And it contributes an enormous amount of fresh water to Puget Sound, which affects the ecology in that whole region, as well as being a huge contributor of salmon to the environment in the Puget Sound and the Pacific. So some resources say 1/3 of salmon in the Puget Sound return to Skagit. That's obviously rough. It depends on the year. But the Skagit's a huge watershed. And then, for scale, you've got the Stillaguamish to the south. The Samish is here. I'll point that out in a minute. And then the Nooksack. Here's another view of the enormity of the Skagit River watershed. It goes up all the way in quite a ways to British Columbia. So much of it is in Skagit County, but in Whatcom as well. And then some of our volunteers will be surveying in the Samish River, which is a much smaller watershed between the Nooksack and the Skagit. NS and NP are some examples of some streams that are over there. So here's an artist's illustration of the 5 species of Pacific salmon, showing that Chinook up at the top can be quite large, and pink humpies at the bottom can be quite small. This photo simplifies their size differences. You can have large coho be bigger than small Chinook, so size isn't going to be your only indicator. So quick review of the salmon life cycle. They're anadromous, which means that they begin their life in fresh water as eggs tucked into the gravel, and they hatch into alvin and feed off of egg sacs. They use up that resource and they turn into fry. And some fry will exit the river and head to the ocean soon after hatching, such as pink and chum. Other species rear in the freshwater for quite some time, like coho. Coho will rear for a year in the freshwater before heading out to the ocean. They go through a process called smoltification, where their entire body changes from being a freshwater fish to a saltwater fish, which is a process that affects all of their organs, especially their breathing and their eating, because freshwater fish, they have to keep saltiness in their body so that they don't, so that their nervous system is able to function. And saltwater fish have to keep water in their body and saltiness out. So they have a big reversal in their waste systems and their digestive systems. Different species of salmon spend different amounts of times out in the ocean. Pink are always 2 years old, and then Chinook can be up to 6 years old before they return to the stream where they were born. And they go through the smoltification process, but opposite, where they turn saltwater to freshwater fish. But in this case, they stop eating for the most part. Their immune systems stop, which can mean that they're rotting while they're still alive. So you may see fish that have big white spots on their back, and that's going to be fungus that's on their that's growing out of their tissue, because they put all of their resources on a cellular level into swimming upstream, finding a mate, digging a redd, and then reproducing. The Pacific salmon always die after they start this process. So they get one chance to reproduce, and then that's it. And then the cycle continues. So some spawning behaviors that you might see, the females will dig a redd. Redds are what salmon nests are called, where they tuck their eggs into the gravel. This behavior consists of the females turning on their side and then using their tail in strong swimming motions to push the gravel out of the way. Larger fish like Chinook will be able to move larger pieces of rock, and smaller fish like pink will not be able to move as big of rock. So that's one of the reasons that different species of salmon have different preferences for different habitat types. Chinook tend to like bigger streams and even the main stem river to dig their redds and safely put their eggs in the rocks. And then smaller fish, such as coho, prefer smaller streams with smaller substrate to tuck their eggs in. You may see salmon with white tails. This is because they dig their redds so vigorously that it strips their scales off of their tails. So some of the traits that we talk about, how to identify salmon, may include features on their tail that may not be possible if their tail is very damaged or completely stripped of skin. So it'll be important to know multiple different ways to identify a salmon, just in case they're too damaged to go off the tails. Males compete with each other. This is one of the reasons that chum salmon have huge teeth, and they're also called dog salmon. You may see a female select a redd location and then multiple males competing, because when she starts to deposit her eggs, whoever fertilizes those eggs gets the possibility of reproducing. And we're going to go over some pictures of how to identify redds, because that's one of the things that you'll do as a spawner surveyor. So run times. This can be important for identification purposes. So notice how in this diagram it shows that coho and Chinook run times don't overlap. That's not necessarily true. There can be still the ending of the fall Chinook run and the beginning of a coho run, depending on the rain what time of year the rain comes. This year is not a pink year, so we don't expect to see any pink in any streams. And chum will not start. Coho will start running in October, right about the time surveys start. Chum won't stop running until later. And in most streams, you won't. Most surveyors shouldn't expect to see chum. Most of what you see will be coho, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't be familiar on how to identify them. So we're going to go over how to identify salmon. Chinook salmon are listed as threatened under the ESA, the Endangered Species Act. They're commercially important, environmentally important. They're important to feed our local orcas. I've read in some sources that half of the remaining Puget Sound Chinook come from the Skagit. A number like that is going to vary year to year, but I know that the Skagit is one of the best watersheds as far as recovery potential, especially in the estuary, because the Skagit has a lot of intact estuary, unlike some other rivers that have big developed areas around the estuary and estuary impacts. Chinook rely on both the estuary and the upper river habitats. In the spring, they emerge from the gravel, and ocean type Chinook will go out right away and rear in the estuary, but stream type Chinook will rear upriver. So they really depend on high quality year-round habitat from upriver in the headwaters to the estuary to the open ocean. So we've got 6 stocks. We'll only be seeing fall Chinook in our surveys this time of year. So here's a trend line for Chinook since overall since the 70s. As you can see, year to year, there can be a lot of variation, and that depends on anything from poor ocean conditions to maybe a very poorly timed flood destroying reds when the eggs or the fry are still tucked in the gravel, and they can get killed by a big flood, to other environmental conditions. Overall, the trend is fairly flat with maybe a positive uptick, but this is an endangered species, nevertheless. And then here's how we're going to ID them. Chinook on average are the largest salmon, but that doesn't mean that every Chinook will be larger than every coho. So size, if you see a massive salmon and it's still the time of year where you can expect a Chinook run to occur, so until October approximately, then you can start thinking Chinook if you see a huge salmon, but chum can also be quite large. So you'll have to keep investigating from there. Their shape, Chinook are a robust salmon. You get this kind of instinct about body shape after seeing a lot of examples of a lot of adult salmon. They have a large beefy caudal peduncle. That's this fleshy area between body and tail. And that's as opposed to some more dainty fish. So chum tend to have a more dainty caudal peduncle. And that again comes from seeing multiple examples. Some easier traits to identify them is color. Most often Chinook in their river colors tend to be olive, but they can be a little pink. So just because a salmon is slightly reddish, slightly pink doesn't mean it is not a Chinook, but spots on the back dorsal fin. And then here's a really great trait to look at, spots on the upper and lower lobe. These are going to be small spots. Pink salmon, which are much, much, much smaller than Chinook, most of the time, they have large oval spots. Chinook are going to have small round spots on both the upper and lower ends of the tail. And then finally, the lower gum is black. And we're going to look at a specific picture on the next slide. So another nickname for Chinook are blackmouths. When you hear that name, this is what typically comes to mind. These pictures on the bottom is what you'll see in a book. Entirely black mouth, black gums. You're going to be looking at the lower jaw, by the way, for this, not the upper jaw. And then coho over here, you see it on the lower picture for coho, the white, thick band, very clearly white gums. Unfortunately, fish aren't always this pristine and cooperative. So the upper pictures are another thing that you might see. Chinook here, the key is to look at the bottom jaw and then the gum tissue that's touching the teeth. So although this top Chinook picture has a lot of light white around its mouth, there are spots in its mouth where black is touching the teeth. And so that's what's going to tell you it's Chinook, not the rest of the mouth, not the lips, not the tongue, not the upper jaw, the lower jaw. And then another example of coho. If you ever doubt your identification, you're not sure, then write down every trait that you observed and take some photos and send them to me. And I'll either tell you what I think, or if it's a really difficult salmon, then I will get some help from board members or fish biologists to confirm the ID of that salmon. And then, yeah, this is a reminder that that Chinook tend to run August to October, and they prefer deeper water, large tributaries and the main stem river. They don't love to be near the surface and have their back dorsal fin out of the water. So we don't expect them to be present in very small streams. Okay, so then we're going to look at coho. This is what most people are going to see. They are also called silver salmon. They, unlike Chinook, prefer small streams. They don't mind having their dorsal fin out of the water while they're traveling upstream. They, as I said before, they rear in the freshwater for a year before heading out to the ocean, and they typically return after 3 to 4 years. Overall, in the Skagit River, coho salmon tend to be decreasing with large variations year to year. We have some data coming in from WDFW and other sources, and what we're hearing is that this year is going to be a good year for coho. So cross our fingers that that's the case. Last year was, 2019 isn't on here, but 2019 was a bad year for coho. So we expect everybody to see more salmon this year than they saw last year. Okay, so these are mid-sized salmon. They can still be quite large, topping out at 38 inches. Males, so you'll see in some salmon identification sources that males have a very hooked pipe. That's their Muppet nose. But this is not a feature that I would like you to use for species identification, because all of the 5 Pacific salmon species get a somewhat hooked nose. Not every male you see is going to look like the male in this picture on this slide. So if you see an extremely prominent hooked pipe, you can begin to think coho, but then look further. One feature that is sometimes really visible in a live fish situation is the white nostril. They look like, some people call them headlamps, the white spot on their nose between their eye and their cape. That's a feature that you'll see on coho, and that was well pictured in this photo here. Look between the eye and the cape and see that white spot. That is a feature of coho. They typically are colored red on the sides with an olive back and olive head. This varies somewhat. The tail in pristine specimens will be dark like this. They can have small spots on the upper lobe of the tail, but not on the lower lobe. So if you see small spots on the upper and lower lobes and maybe a more olive fish, then you would be looking at potentially a Chinook. But spots on the upper lobe are common in coho. And again, light gums, which is on this slide again as a reminder. Light gums on the flesh that touches the lower teeth would tell you it's a coho. All right, so the next species are chum. They're the second largest after Chinook. They prefer the water. They prefer streams close to the estuary because they're really, despite being large, they're terrible jumpers. They're also called dog or kita salmon. Dog salmon refers to how big their teeth get in males when they turn into their river form. They spend 3 to 5 years in the ocean. The trend line for the Skagit is trending down for some reason. As far as I know, we're not sure why. Chum are tending to decrease in Washington rivers that start with the letter S. The Samish, the Skagit, the Stillaguamish. However, up in the Nooksack, that's not what they're seeing. So it's really river dependent how the chum are doing. Chum, I think, are some of the most beautiful salmon. They are large. They can be 45 inches long from cape to tail. They tend to have a football shaped, including a small, more dainty caudal peduncle, which again is that area between the body and the tail. It'll be much smaller compared to the body than in Chinook. They will get these, like a green body with these vertical calico bands that can be red and purple. And then again, the big teeth. And you also would expect to see no spots on the tail if the tail were in good condition. They prefer small streams, especially lower in the river. So you would not expect to see these in the upper reaches, such as Marble Mount, especially November to even if it was November to January, which is when they run. 2020 is not a pink year, so we're going to go over this really quick. They're the smallest of the salmon with 2-year life cycles. They return in odd years to the Skagit, so we would expect a large pink run in 2021. Pink are tending to be doing really well in the Skagit River, with populations increasing fairly steadily since 1960s. These guys are small. They have spots in the upper and lower lobes, as I said, but these are large and oval, potentially the size of a pencil eraser, and these will be much bigger than the spots on Chinook. Males can get very large humps, which is why they're also sometimes called humpies. This is a deformation of their spine that happens when they turn into their river form, and they're often dull gray with a cream-colored belly. And then finally, sockeye. They're also called red salmon. They are found in reaches that have lakes. So we have a large native run on the Baker River that gets trucked up and down above and below the dam. These are tending to do quite well in the Skagit, which is exciting. We'll go over identification, but I don't expect our surveyors to see this salmon. They tend to be on the smaller side, but up to 30 inches. Males can have quite a hunched back, almost similar to pinks, as well as a very hooked nose, which you can see in coho. They're often quite vivid red, more bright than coho, with green heads, which can be olive or bright green. These also have no spots on their tail. And so we do have creeks that we'll see a type of sockeye called kokanee. Kokanee salmon are a type of sockeye salmon that historically during the last ice age were isolated from the ocean, but since these are lake dependent salmon, populations that were cut off from the ocean were able to persist. These salmon are much smaller. The kokanee salmon are much smaller than their sea-run sockeye counterparts because nutrients are less available in freshwater environments. These are, this photo was actually taken from Mud and Finnegan Creek, which are creeks that are surveyed by spawner surveyors. So these sockeye will be observed by spawner surveyors. We don't expect kokanee to be in the other reaches. If you see small salmon on other creeks, you may be looking at what's called a jack. And jacks are salmon. They occur in coho and often in Chinook that return instead of after 4 or 5 or 6 years, after 1 or 2 years. They'll be maybe the size of a kokanee, 18 inches long, and they are males that, although they are not very old or sexually mature, and they can, sometimes you'll see them skulking around a red that has a full-size male and female, and the jack will try to sneakily fertilize some of the eggs when the female starts depositing them. So if you see any small weird fish, still look for the identification features, take a picture, but they're unlikely to be a kokanee unless you're on Mud and Finnegan. They're likely to be a jack. Okay, so people can pipe in and answer this for me. If it's December and you're a spawner surveyor, what salmon species would it be possible for you to see? I can't see if anybody can just pipe in as soon as they think of an answer. Some brave person. Maybe an AmeriCorps service member. They're welcome to pipe in as well. All right. All right, well, the answer is chum and coho. You can, those are salmon that run in creeks that we do spawner surveys. You would not expect to see Chinook in December.
But
Okay.
kokanee is right too, if you're on the
Kokanee
right
is
site.
also right.
So
Correct.
Catherine, yes.
Kokanee, oh yes, thanks for watching the chat. Kokanee would also, if you're on Mud and Finnegan, correct.
And would it be allowable if people want to go see some kokanee and they're not going to see them anywhere else? They could partner up with that group at Mud and Finnegan.
Yes, we are. We're looking to see if it's possible to get permission to use a parking lot and to tell a wider group of people that they can go see kokanee if they want to. But for this group, if you're really interested in seeing kokanee salmon, then reach out to Danielle or Lucy or I, and we can try to arrange a time where you can go out with that crew and do the spawner survey with them. It's not a particularly difficult survey, and it's really cool to see that many salmon, and they're just so small. They're just so cute.
They're like pocket size sockeye. They're really adorable.
Very cute. Okay, here's another quiz question. What salmon is this?
You should ask them to justify why they think that.
Yes, and tell us why. That's great. That's the educator.
What is it and why?
What is it and why? And Lucy, you're helping me watch the chat.
I am.
Great. And if some brave soul wants to unmute themselves and pipe in, that is encouraged. Bonus points for them.
It has a red body, green head. It's a sockeye.
That is a good guess.
Togo.
Because sockeyes.
Oh, so it's not right?
It is not. Oh, yep. I heard. Is that Hal that I heard? That's a
That's right.
coho. Yes. So this is hard because it's hard to see the tail, but this fish could have no spots on the tail or spots on the upper lobe. 32 inches. That would be very large for a sockeye. They get that big, but the telltale sign in this photo is the white nostril between the eye and the kype. But that was an excellent guess. Sockeye do have red heads or red bodies and green heads. So this is a confusing coho that is actually pretty brilliant red for a coho. A lot of coho don't get quite this brightly colored. So
Erin, are the giveaways that it's not sockeye, one of them being that white nostril, but also the size of it? I mean, we can't see the tail. That would be hard to see the tail in this picture, but the fact that sockeye don't get that big, do they?
yeah, this big would indicate coho. I think it's possible for sockeye to be this big, but they tend to not be quite this big. You would also know in the real life scenario which creek you were on and if there was a lake. So an acceptable answer would also be what time of year is it and what creek am I on? Because you should take those into consideration when identifying salmon. So if you were around Baker Lake, then you would be more inclined to think that sockeye were possible. But for most of our creeks, then you wouldn't see sockeye unless it was a kokanee, and this is much too large to be a kokanee. So, but it's confusing. It has got the coloring of a sockeye. Okay, so now we're gonna go over our data sheet. Again, we're gonna need data every 7 to 10 days on your assigned creek. If we don't hear from you for a while, then we'll start emailing you and asking you, is everything okay? Have you been out? Can you send your data sheets in? So please do what you can to send them every week. You can take a photo and you can email us a photo of it from your phone. You can scan it and send it into us. You can as a PDF file. Those are both okay. You can take a picture with your camera and email it to us that way. And if you're having logistical problems sending us the data sheet, if you're someone who used to drop them off in person more often and you're having trouble, then reach out to us and let us know, and we'll try to work with you. It's also important to fill out the data sheet completely and to use legible handwriting. So I know that our fingers get cold when it's January and you're finishing walking your creek, but really do your best to make it legible. So the protocol is we're gonna have you walk your creek to get familiar with it before collecting data. This year, most people are returning to a creek that they've walked before because of COVID, making it difficult to gather in groups. But for those people who are new on their creeks, they're gonna be walking it with someone who's experienced the first time. You're gonna collect your data every week to 10 days. If you need to not do a survey due to weather, and that makes it you have to do 11 days, like let us know, but we're not gonna be upset with you if you decide it's unsafe to walk and that makes it 11 days. But if you are unable to do it every week or in 10 days because of other logistical reasons and it would be safe for someone to watch it, then let us know. If there's one person who needs a partner, then we can help you get connected with another spawner surveyor who's available. We also, I think, have a spare person who was interested in spawner surveys, but we had all our creeks assigned. And so they're gonna be a stand-in for people in case anyone gets sick or injured or is busy one week. So just let us know, we can help you find a buddy. You're gonna walk upstream on the stream bank as much as possible to avoid disturbing fish. We're gonna talk about how to identify reds, but reds can get harder and harder to spot when they're old, and if you miss one and you walk through it, then you can destroy it and kill the egg. So as much as possible, we're going to walk upstream on the stream bank and cross only when necessary to just protect all of these young fish. We're going to check out hand clippers so that you can clip a path through the bank of your stream. So let us know if you need those. Don't survey if the flow is too high and it's not safe. What weather will make each stream unsafe is dependent on the stream. So we're trusting you to use your best judgment. It's safety first. One indication that it may be, the flow may be too high to survey safely is if the flow is so high that the turbidity is really high. There's a lot of suspended solids and you can't see anything. That is a good indication that the flow is too high and you should come back at a later date. Because if you walk a whole creek and the turbidity makes it look like chocolate milk, you're not doing a good survey. You're likely not doing a good survey because you're likely missing fish. If you do not survey, if you miss a week and things happen, then please do not fill out a data sheet with 0, because 0 means that you went to your creek, you counted salmon, and you observed 0 fish. Unknown is what gets entered to the database when a survey is not completed that week. And then we always get this question every season. So at the end of the season, if you see salmon, you're going to continue walking your creek until you haven't seen any fish for 2 whole weeks in a row. And then that'll be the end. For most people, it'll be December. Maybe a few people will still be walking in January. If you don't see any salmon, which I'm hoping is not the case for most people this year because of the good runs that are forecasted, then reach out to us and we'll look at what people are seeing in the area and we'll help you pick an end date. Okay, so if you need to miss, do notify staff before, if possible, so we can arrange a substitute, and do not write a 0 on your data sheet and turn it in if a survey wasn't completed. We made a small change to the data sheet this year at the top. So you're going to be filling out the stream name and crew members and crew leader. And this year, the crew leader has the job of certifying that all team members that have no COVID symptoms. So ask everyone on your team how they're feeling and if they have, did they check their temperature? Do they have a sore throat? Are they feeling tired? Are they experiencing a new loss of taste and smell? Any of those COVID symptoms? Anyone with symptoms should not be walking the stream. Even if you get all the way out there and then somebody starts feeling crummy and sick, that's a safety issue. Stop the survey. Everybody go home, just let us know and we'll help you figure something out. You also need to check before you start the survey that everybody has all their protective gear, including a face mask. You have to wear your face mask if you're going to be within 6 feet of each other. We prefer if you wear it all the time. Check in with your partner about their comfort level. And if your partner really wants everybody to wear a mask all the time, then we want everybody to feel safe while volunteering with us. So please, please stick to the preferences of the most conservative person safety-wise. And if anybody's uncomfortable with walking or with proceeding or with someone not wearing a mask, then that's a problem. So everyone should feel safe while they're volunteering with us. And so that's going to be the crew leader that checks that box at the beginning. If you choose to not use the data sheet in the field and use a Write in the Rain notebook, then we still want you to, we strongly suggest that you prepare your Write in the Rain notebook with prompts for these different data boxes so that you don't forget to collect anything. And we also want you to check in the field that everybody has no COVID symptoms and has their PPE. If you're not wearing your mask because you're social distancing over 6 feet, it still needs to be very quickly accessible in case you do need to become less than 6 feet apart. If somebody slips and you need to give them a hand, not falling into the creek, your mask needs to be around your neck because you need to pull it up over your face before coming within 6 feet of your partner. So in your backpack, tucked away in the bottom is not acceptable location for a mask. Okay, so when it comes to flow type, and visibility, water conditions, viewing conditions, please pick one. When you pick multiple, if you pick that creek is both low and clear and also flooding, then that's really confusing. And when we enter the data, we have to pick one. It's much better for you to pick one because you were standing at the creek observing it than for someone in the office 2 months later to pick one. So just pick the viewing conditions and flow type that most represents the characteristics of the stream on that day. So, so for example, don't pick some glare and snowing. Pick the viewing condition that most applies that day. Okay. As you walk upstream, you're gonna record all live fish seen by species to the best of your ability. If you see a live fish and you're not sure, you can write under other, you can write unknown. Another example, if you see another fish species that you want to know under other, you can, but if you don't know if you saw a coho or a chinook, if you have a stream that we expect coho and chinook, it's about medium size and you didn't get the color, you can put unknown note coho or chinook. And that's fine. It's better for you to make an educated guess if it's possible. So if you're unsure but pretty sure it was a coho, then you guys can go ahead and put coho. But if you're really unsure, just put unknown. Do your best count. So if there's too many fish to do a great count, it is completely acceptable to count them in tens or dozens. So if you come up to an area where there's many salmon, this happens on Mud and Finnegan, many live salmon, and they're all moving around, just do your best estimation and give us your best number. You can count 10 plus 20, that's 30, plus about 5, that's 35 plus, and do your best. And you can write a note in the note section if that's how you counted and that there were so many fish that you're unsure, but it is always better to put in a number than unknown. And another note that we don't like is too many to count, because that's not data that we can turn into WDFW. So if it was impossible to get a good count and you know that there were at least 400, then put down 400. There may have actually been 450, but the number 400 is so much better than too many to count. So just give your best count. If you have any trouble with this, just reach out to us and we'll help you. We'll send you some more information about strategies, but this best count approach is used by professional biologists, counting large flocks of birds and and other really, really challenging large groups of animals. So another approach that I can suggest is if you have both partners on the team do an independent count and then average those counts together. When people do those things where there's 1,000 gummy bears in a jar and everyone is guessing how many, each individual guess can be quite inaccurate, but when you average all the guesses of everybody who participates in that contest, the average number people come up with is usually quite accurate. So if there's 4 people, if there's 2 people, have 2 separate counts and then average those 2 counts. That's another good approach. Okay, another thing you're going to collect data on are carcasses. And you've also got this other section here, number with no adipose fin. Okay, so here's a photo of what an adipose fin is. It's something that all Pacific salmon have, as well as other salmonids, Atlantic salmon, trout, and some other closely related species. It's a fatty fin that doesn't have rays. And this fin is often clipped off during an early life stage when they're fry at hatcheries. So it's going to be really important if you have a carcass in your hand to check if it has an adipose fin. Adipose fins can be flat against the body or damaged. And so a clipped fin is going to be flat, cleanly clipped, an injury that's going to be well healed over on a salmon that's 3 or 4 years old. And intact adipose fin, it may be damaged, but it'll be fleshy and not flat and well healed. So if you have a carcass with no adipose fin, you record that on the data sheet in this top yellow box. And if it has an adipose fin, then you won't write anything there. So what you're recording there is number of no adipose fin or number of fish that are likely hatchery fish.
And your carcasses will be bigger than that one that Sheila's holding there.
Yeah, Sheila's holding a fish that's the age where they're clipped off. So she's looking for a little tiny adipose fin. It'll be, if it's present, it'll be big enough to see on the carcasses that you have, big enough to see without a magnifying glass.
So only adipose fins on carcasses?
Yeah, you won't be
Not
able to
live
see
fish?
on a live moving fish if it has an
Okay.
adipose fin or not. Yeah, that's you'd have to have superhuman vision. So only on the carcasses.
I need to leave.
Okay. Well, Hal, we'll have this posted on YouTube and we'll send everyone the link. So if you want to see the rest of it, then
Okay.
you'll have to see the safety portion. And if you want to see the rest of the methods, then you
Yeah,
can.
I thought the safety portion would be done first.
Oh, sorry.
Okay,
It's at
bye.
the end. Bye, Hal. Okay, so carcass size. For every carcass, you're gonna write down the species and the fork length. And so that's gonna be the length from the pipe to the shortest portion of the tail in the middle. So just if a tail is collapsible and you can make the tips of the lobes point, that's not the length you want. We want from pipe to the tail on the back. So here's some pictures of carcasses. They're covered in mold and pretty gross. So you're gonna identify it to species first, then you're gonna measure it from pipe to tail. Here's another example where they're measuring it. Often people put measuring ticks on their walking stick. We have walking sticks that we can lend out to people. So just let Danielle know if that's one of the pieces of equipment that you would like to borrow. And you can measure them to the nearest centimeter, and that's more than adequate. Here's an example of, you see the yellow flesh around the tail. This salmon was either struggling against the rocks and or digging a red, and it has stripped their scales and skin off. So this salmon, you won't be able to identify it using the features on the tail. Measuring carcasses. Here's an example of a kokanee salmon, quite small, just 24, 25 centimeters long. We are going to need the measurements in centimeters and metric. So after you have measured a carcass, you're going to clip the tail off. This is going to help you, and then you're going to leave the carcass where you found it. If you find a floating carcass in the water and you want to put it on the bank while you work on it, that's fine. You can leave it on the bank. If the fish is alive, even if it's almost dead, if it's still moving around, it's just don't cut the tail off. Just because they're dying doesn't mean we want you to hold down a half-dead salmon and cut their tail off. Accidents happen. Sometimes they seem quite dead until you start working on the tail, and then you realize they're not all the way dead, and that's sad. Cutting off the tail helps you know to not count that carcass on your next walk if that carcass is still present. You're also going to be cutting open the carcass from anal opening, cut open their belly. You're going to be seeing if the carcasses are male or female. And then you're also going to look for pre-spawn mortality, which we'll talk in a minute. You're going to look for reds, the salmon nest that we talked about earlier. If you find a red, you're going to take out some flagging, which we can check out to everybody. And you're going to write the date, the group that you're volunteering with, SFEG, and then the species for that red. So, and here are the species codes to write. You may not know what species made that red if you don't observe any fish swimming over the red or around the red. And that's okay, you can put unknown, or you can use other indicators, like if you're on a stream where only coho have been observed, then you can write coho. So just use your best judgment on that. Here's an example of what the flagging looks like. This volunteer is standing in the water. That is okay, but since she's marking a red, then she's going to be super careful about standing in a place that isn't going to harm the eggs. One thing that you should look for when identifying reds is the substrate size. So it's going to be gravel 1 to 10 centimeters wide. You will not see reds in mud, and you will not see reds in big boulders. Sometimes pink, if they can't find any better suitable habitat, will just drop their eggs between huge rocks that they're too small to move. But the other species are going to be looking for a place to dig a red. So look for cobble to gravel substrate. And then we're going to go over some photos. Here's the spawning behavior. You've got 2 probably males here that are waiting in place to fertilize the eggs. When salmon eggs hit the water, you've got less than a minute before the outside of the egg hardens. It's important for the eggs to harden so that they can survive in the gravel covered in rocks. But once they harden, they cannot be fertilized anymore. So the male has to be right there, ready to fertilize the eggs basically the moment they come out of the female, because they have to be covered up right away and ready to be buried. So here's a female using her tail to dig the rocks, and probably 2 males present, but sometimes females hang out together and make their reds close because it's suitable habitat. Okay, and here's the anatomy of a red. So in this slide, you've got water going from the left side to the right side, flowing downstream. Most salmon species are looking for downwelling. So in a stream, the water in a stream isn't just the water that you see above the rocks. There's this whole part of the stream where the water is also underground, and the water under the rocks is flowing through the rocks slowly, as well as just like the water that's on the surface. This downwelling of water through the rocks is really important because eggs have to breathe oxygen. And so they have to have constant contact with oxygenated water that was previously on the surface and is trickling past them. So when a female finds a suitable habitat with the correct size gravel and some downwelling, then she will use her tail to dig a pit, which is in the middle in diagram B. And then she'll deposit her eggs towards the front of that pit and cover them. So when you've identified a red and you go to mark it, and perhaps you have to stand near the red to put a flag, it's better to stay on the bank. But if you have to stand in the water to mark it, you're going to make sure that you stand upstream of it, away from both the pit and the pile of material. Some people expect to have the eggs at the bottom of the pit. They're thinking like a bird's nest situation where, but for salmon eggs, it's actually in the material that's deposited next to the pit. Your best bet is to just stand outside of the pit, outside of the material, under the word pool in diagram C. So if you have to stand in the water near a red, just be really careful to not step on the eggs. There's another diagram. And reds are large, so you are not going to expect to see reds 6 or 8 inches across. These are Chinook reds. They're so big that they can be identified in helicopters. The reason that these reds are light is because during the process of the female vigorously using her tail to dig the hole, it strips off the biological material growing on the rocks, the plankton and algae, and it typically cleans them off. So when you're looking for a red, you're going to be looking for a pit and a spoil pile, and with the right size substrate, gravel to cobble, and then something where the rocks around are cleaner than in the rest of the stream. So here's an example of a red, and this is quite large, several feet across. So even for coho, which are smaller than Chinook, you're still going to expect a red to be 2-3 feet wide. And then another indicator is looking for a sudden difference in the size of bed material. So when a female vigorously shakes her tail, it's gonna move the smaller material more easily than the larger material. So in this picture, there's the red. You've got the sand in front here. That's the front of the pit. And then the eggs are likely tucked in under these big rocks. So you would not want to stand anywhere in this circle, and you would want to mark this as a red on your data sheet and with flagging. You might see this behavior with salmon over a red. You can observe them and see if they look like they're still digging or if they spawn. You see them spawn and tuck it in, then you can definitely mark that as a red and to species. If you don't see them spawn and they're still digging it, that's something that you should mark on your next survey, because sometimes they begin digging a red and change their mind and go somewhere else. But if you see this behavior of them over it, protecting it, or if you see them spawn, then mark it as, in this case, a coho red. Okay, we're also recording pre-spawn mortality. Pre-spawn mortality is especially an issue for coho. It can happen because before they're able to reproduce, they're eaten. It can happen because of sudden water level changes where maybe the water level drops and they get stranded and die, or from pollution, which coho are particularly sensitive. We have pretty low rates of pre-spawn mortality in the Skagit River, but we still collect this data so that we can compare our rates to the rates of other more impacted rivers year to year, and also so we can see a trend over time. If it appears that pre-spawn mortality is becoming worse and worse and worse, that might be a good indication that some action needs to be taken to try to limit pollution. So how we're gonna look into this is we're gonna check each coho carcass for eggs or milt, which is another word for sperm. So we're gonna, a boot check is when you step on the salmon and see what comes out of their anal opening. If you lightly step on a salmon and orange eggs come out everywhere, large amounts of eggs or a large amount of milts, then that's a good indicator that it's a pre-spawn mortality. I personally prefer using pruners or a knife to open them. So you're going to record that here. Pre-spawn mortality, yes or no for each carcass, and then you're going to make notes about things like predation. If the pre-spawn mortality fish is in excellent condition, not scavenged, that's a really good indication that it died due to pollution, not to predation. If it's scavenged, it's harder to say if it was a predation event or if it died of pollution and then was scavenged. But record the state of the carcass here, and then also if it's a yes or no on your pre-spawn mortality. This is why I like to use my clippers to open up the salmon. If a female is a pre-spawn mortality, it's going to be full of eggs. Just 10 or 15 eggs, 30 eggs left over is not enough to count a pre-spawn mortality. Female salmon are going to be full of eggs, and same thing with male salmon. You'll see a large amount of white liquid of the milt in the testes, which are organs that are in the bottom third of the fish. And if you poke around with it, then you'll see that they're full of gametes that they never got to use to reproduce. Okay, so that's the methods section. Before I go to safety, does anybody have any questions? And questions are going to come up in the field, and that's okay. Before we do questions, we're also going to do an optional in-person training on the 3rd, this Saturday at Pomona Grange. You'll get the info in your email, and you can come 10 to 12 and we'll do an in-person training and we'll talk about how to ID reds. But are there any other questions? And you can unmute and just pipe in, or you can add them in the chat box, or you can reach out to us via email now or later. Okay. Safety. We're going to go over a lot of different things: COVID safety gear, buddy system, hypothermia, what recommended car gear, and what we'd like to see you have in the field. Some tips for preventing injuries, some other field work hazards, and then in case of an emergency or injury, then what to do.